Hi, everybody. Megan Thompson from Megan Thompson Coaching. And if you're catching this live, say hello. If you're catching this on the replay, hashtag replay. So, for those of you who have just recently joined, I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and registered play therapist supervisor. I've been running a coaching business for several years now, and we have a team. And I also run a private practice in Maryland, and been working with highly sensitive children for over a decade at this point. And my group practice also specializes, my team of clinicians, in working with highly sensitive children and teens. So we help parents through this avenue eliminate daily meltdowns in as little as 8 weeks. And what I want to speak about today is one of the things that we hear so often from parents, which is the fact that coping skills don't work. They just don't know how to get my kid to use them consistently. So what I want to speak about is the myth of having a coping skills toolbox. So how many of you have taken your kid to a professional or had a conversation or read a mom blog or been on Pinterest to gather a list of different coping skills that your kid can, for lack of a better word, grab bag in the middle of a meltdown? So what I know for sure is that this strategy, while played out in the world of emotional management, is super ineffective for highly sensitive kids. And I want to speak about that today. But what I want to speak about first is, who the scenario is true for. So that we really get the nitty gritty around how this is showing up in your life, even if it might not feel like it's accurate for you just yet. So I want to speak about the cycle of dealing with a meltdown and the intense ramp up of a meltdown that you might experience. So the meltdown, in any emotional intensity, is a bell curve. It is not a spear, if you will. There is a gradual up and down process, though highly sensitive children who are dealing with daily meltdowns or outbursts or running away or elopement, leaving the house, not just running away to their room, elopement out of the house, or threatening to harm themselves or others, their meltdowns can feel a lot like peaks, like spikes, or plateaus. Then the bell curve we learned in is that calculus? In math. So guys, I've had to learn math to run businesses, but that's about it. So I can't quote it effectively. But anyways, that's why I do what I do. So one of the things that I think is important to understand when we think about the concept of a bell curve and how it's supposed to look super pretty, up and down, like a nice upside down U with those tails, I think they're called. Statistics class. Yeah, I had to take that in grad school too. We also learned bell curves there. So it came back to me. Anyways, the important piece is that the concept of how meltdowns look differently than a typical emotional intense emotional experience for either a non-highly sensitive person or a highly sensitive person who has skills to manage their emotions. So when we think about teaching your child skills so that they don't experience peaks, spikes, intense emotions that flood them with intense emotions so much so that their behaviors become intense, that is likely more often than not, and by that I mean non-statistically speaking, 90% of the time. So, your child may be scared and they'll experience a peak of emotion. If on Halloween, somebody in a scary costume pops out or they watch a scary movie, that's an appropriate peak of emotion. But if your child is irritated that their sibling, sat next to them and touched their fork, and they had an intense peak of emotion, that is due to a gap in skill development. So, that's a repeated pattern for you. That's where the gap in skill development is pretty obvious. So obviously, that's a very minimal experience, but that could lead to a meltdown for many of the families that we've worked with and for many of the families that we speak to and many of the families here in this group. So that little quote unquote, little of an example for your child can send the whole ball rolling down the hill. So I want to speak about helping your child out of that intense emotion through the use of a coping skills toolbox and why it hasn't been working for you and what needs to be addressed to turn it around. So first and foremost, what we see is that the intense emotion your child is experiencing is then met with you trying to help them find a skill to calm down. And that might look like you're asking them or giving them choices or giving them options or telling them that they need to take deep breaths, whatever. And oftentimes we see children either slightly try or just outright, it's in one ear, out the other. They are at the peak of their meltdown. And there is literally no logic that they are able to consume in their brain at that point. And so it just feels like for brevity's sake, that the information is falling on deaf ears and your child is wanting to feel better, right? Because no child was put on this earth to feel miserable. Nobody wants to feel miserable. And your child doesn't have the skills to get out of the misery. And so in that moment, they are refusing to use the skills, or trying and then immediately, when it doesn't work immediately, throwing the slime across the room or, spitting in your face when you're trying to help them take deep breaths or running away from the dinner table when you're trying to help them calm down. And so what we often see for parents is that there's a myth out there that you need to have a tool for every need in your toolbox. And this is actually a trap that I fell into early in my career as a therapist, and where I was teaching the concept that if you had multiple tools in your toolbox to manage skills, that you would then be able to manage your intense emotions. But there's a pretty significant gap in that process that just isn't often taught in skill building for sensitive children in particular. So first I want to break this down. So often the metaphor is, you need a hammer to put a nail in the wall. You need a screwdriver to put a screw into the wall. You need a wrench to, here's my knowledge of tools, guys. You need a wrench to tighten a bolt, a nut, one of the two, the one that has a hole in it. You need a drill to drill into wood, drill a screw into wood. You need, etc. So you might need deep breaths to take care of this kind of anxiety. You might need silly putty and stretchy things to take care of frustration. You might need, running to take care of anger, whatever. You get the point. Here's the myth. That's just not how things work. It's just not how things work when we think about a grab bag of skills and how one is supposed to fit any particular situation, or if your child's experiencing intense emotion, that they're just going to be able to easily grab from their toolbox and something is going to work. The main reason, one of the main reasons why this isn't working for you is because oftentimes you're in the position where your child is having a meltdown. You're trying to get them to use a skill. They're not able to use it. That escalates the meltdown. And then you may talk about the meltdown afterwards and what they could have done better, differently next time. And then they have a great conversation with you. They know what they are supposed to do. They want to do better. Again, nobody was put on this earth to be miserable. They understand logically, because your child is very bright, how they could be doing things differently, when they could have done something differently, what they're supposed to say when they need to ask for help, etc. And then after they're done talking about it, half an hour, 2 hours, half a day rolls by, another meltdown happens, and they don't use their scales. And you are left holding the bag and pulling your hair out, trying not to yell and or run away yourself. And so when this is happening over and over and over again, right? Because with virtual schooling these days, it is very difficult to get a break from your child to begin with, let alone be day in, day out trying to help your child move out of their emotions, so that you can get back to work, so they can get back to school, so that you can, manage other siblings, etc., manage the household, what have you, whatever your additional responsibilities are in that moment. Live your life, read a book, take a shower, all the things, right? And so when this is going on, your child is not only feeling the pressure of needing to stop feeling the feeling because the coping skill is available to them and you're asking them or needing them to do it, but they're also feeling a significant sense of inadequacy because they haven't been able to figure it out. And that's a significant gap between knowing what you're supposed to do and knowing how you're supposed to do it and knowing when you're supposed to do it and knowing how it's supposed to look and feel when you're doing it right, and then how it's supposed to look and feel when you're not doing it effectively. And also choosing skills that are commensurate with their current skill level. So that was a mouthful, but those are the reasons why your child's skills are not landing. So again, often children don't know how to use the skill, the emotional state that it's appropriate for, and what skills for what appropriate emotional states. They also don't know how to aim for a more effective emotional state afterwards, other than calm, basically going from 0 to 60 and then trying to get from 60 to 0. And that can feel insurmountable for sensitive children. And then also knowing how much energy they need to bring to the table to actually use a skill effectively and to sustain and maintain that skill in order for them to actually calm down. Because you can take a big, deep breath and gulp air and hyperventilate and perpetuate the meltdown, right? So it's not just doing the act, but it's doing the act effectively, and it's doing the act effectively so much so that you continue to do the act of using whatever skill, and then actually so that it works. And so when we think about breaking it down like that, yeah, your kid is struggling, and you're probably struggling significantly too, because that's a lot to figure out as a parent. Because when you think about having as many tools as you get in a toolbox, and I'm just thinking like the 10 in like a basic toolbox that you get when maybe you go off to college, or you get your first apartment, or you move out, and like there's 12 tools in that toolbox, and knowing how and when and what and the technique to use all of those tools effectively and efficiently, not only does that take practice, but it also takes somebody who knows what they're doing in using it. And one thing that we also know for sure for parents of sensitive kids, especially non-highly sensitive parents who are parenting a highly sensitive child, is that breaking this skill building process down can be really, really hard, especially if you've built the skill to just keep a lid on your boiling pot. This is something that we see for many parents often, where you've learned to keep your ish together. Not to dissipate your emotions, not to notice them in the moment, decrease them, see them wash away, and have them be done, but to notice your emotions, hold them in, stuff them, keep it together. I'm mimicking the process that you might be having in your mind when you're annoyed, and with my face, and then eventually like watch TV or go to bed, or maybe even take a bath or talk to a friend. But those conversations are often venting, not true effective emotional diminishment. And And so then it's really hard to lead your child from a place that you've never been before. And so you need to be able to do that as well. So, if you've never used the hammer, how can you teach your kid to use the hammer, right? So, if this is resonating with you and it's difficult for you to see how to notice that there are not only multiple tools to use in different situations, but also that your child seems to struggle in not just using those skills, but also in finding the energy, the emotional energy to want to feel better, more than just the awareness that your child obviously doesn't want to feel miserable, but doesn't know how to not just, here I go with triple negatives at this point, I'm trying to say it right in a way that doesn't. So, also that, so your child doesn't want to feel miserable, and your child also wants to feel better, but doesn't know how to take that wanting to feel better, and bring it to the table when they're miserable, like that motivation to feel better. That's a skill in and of itself, to remember that you're motivated to feel better in the moment when you're feeling miserable. Because how many of us have been in the situation, right, where you just didn't want to feel better. You wanted to vent. You wanted to complain. You wanted to feel mad and sad. As an adult, part of you is noticing that you're making a conscious choice about that, right? Like somebody's trying to give you solutions and you're like, dude, I'm not ready for solutions. I just want you to hear me out. I need to share my emotions with you and like talk them out and walk them through in my brain. And then I'll find a solution that will work. The thing is, your highly sensitive child isn't having that internal conversation like that. The internal conversation they're having is, my parent wants me to feel better and I don't know how to do that. And I'm freaking out. And so I must be a bad kid. That's the internal conversation your kid's having. So then they explode more. No, I can't. I won't. No, it won't work. Not because they don't want to feel better and because they can't remember their motivation from a sense of the fact that they're not choosing to remember their motivation, but because in that moment they're so consumed by shame and embarrassment and guilt and fear that motivation can't even make its way through the mud. So without the ability to break through that sludge for you as a parent, to stop holding the lid on a boiling pot yourself, it's going to be very difficult to move your kid out of their own behavior patterns. And this is something that's just not covered in typical coping skill teaching, because when you think about being reactive and trying to handle learning a skill after a big emotion and trying to do it better next time, you're still on a hamster wheel. You're still in a position where you're trying to stay on the same track, but throw different tools at the wall to, spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. I think I just mixed some metaphors here, so I want to make sure I'm getting it clear. The other piece about where parents get stuck around this is in knowing when your child is so overwhelmed that they can't call up motivation, and when your child is trying to call up motivation, but then they're frustrated that the skill isn't working. And then that deflates the amount of motivation. So you're going to pay attention to those things and start to tease out the difference, because the application of what to do next is different. And regarding noticing coping skills and why they're not working, what I really wanted to make sure that we covered today is that the level of patience and consistency that's required isn't just necessary regarding your child's consistency, right? Because your child isn't consistent until they're consistent. And And this is actually so true for parents of sensitive kids who experience intense emotions, that it can even be difficult to remember that your kid is consistent, because by the time they start being consistent with that skill, you might even forget that they had a problem in the first place. So I want to actually tell you about a family where this is true. We just celebrated another family in the group earlier this fall. And so I'm going to put her post up here. This family started with us in March of 2019. So this is pre-pandemic. So like their child was 8 when he got started, and he would run away from the house. And I remember specifically an incident right before Easter where he was playing with family in the neighborhood and playing with different families in the neighborhood. And I want to make sure this is not in my face. There we go. And he had run down the street and around the corner, and mom didn't know where he was. And that's obviously very, very scary. And that was one of the, in addition to the meltdowns, that was one of the major reasons why they had reached out for help, because they had 2 kids, and he was their oldest, and he's still their oldest. I don't know why I said was. He's their oldest. And he's really struggling with being able to stay safe in his own body, but also being able to stay in the same vicinity as the parents. And it's very hard to help your child use skills when you can't see your kid and you don't know where they are, right? Like that's impossible. So I want to speak about this. When we asked families to celebrate back in September, I mean, we do this constantly, but this one's important because I want to speak about stamina and consistency in terms of helping kids with coping skills. Because this family, she said, I'm celebrating 2 things. First, we survived our first day in school, and the next day, distance learning. And although he didn't want to do the distance learning, he realized at the end of the day that it wasn't so bad. And I also realized that he hasn't ran away in months. I can't even remember the last time he was in fight or flight mode with his emotions. He's been so good about checking in about his feelings and expressing them. And when he gets upset, he'll say, I'm feeling blank. So proud of how far we've come in a year and a half out from when we started. It was a slow go, but so worth it. And so what I mean by this is that your child is not consistent in using coping skills until they're consistent in using coping skills. And that timeline is not going to be the timeline that you have in your mind often, because you're, in parenting a highly sensitive child, you may have a timeline that it's going to take a couple of days for your kid to absorb a coping skill. And for some parents, it may take their child years to develop a coping skill, especially without support. So, obviously this parent, they eliminated the daily meltdown cycle in our program because everybody that we work with does that. But what we know is that his intense emotions also, we reduced the eloping so that she knew where he was. More often than not, he would run away in the neighborhood, which is still scary. It's not it's not a safe thing to do. But the running away would be, under his bed. He would leave the house. And so a lot of the process was in helping him find safe places to run to. But doing that in a way that he would actually follow through, right? So in terms of being able to feel capable of managing your emotions and feel capable of following through on a plan, that takes a lot of work. And I'm celebrating these parents because when we think about the consistency, this mom knew that she could not let how much her child was struggling dictate where she knew that he could go in the future. And so when I think about the celebrations that this family has persisted through, the progress in helping him manage his emotions, but also in helping him stay, physically safe in the household, and also, stay in the household in order to be physically safe. The process of being able to notice how both of them as parents were able to impact his ability to stay calm just by noticing their own emotions and how they could dissipate their own emotions was super crucial in this child's success story, because without that awareness of how traditional parenting wasn't working, and even how coping skills focused parenting wasn't working. This mom is a stay-at-home mom, but trained as an elementary education teacher, so she has a lot of skill and is very good at her job. Prides herself at how effective she was as an elementary school teacher, and then really struggled in parenting her son. So she was able to move out of that guilt and fear and worry and concern, and and move through her own emotions, because that was holding her back and being able to be there in the moment for her son and use the strategies that we teach for her son effectively, right? Because this is a family dynamic issue. If your child's experiencing daily meltdowns, it's a family dynamic issue. It's not just a your kid problem. It's also not just a you problem. In terms of working with somebody who says that you can just show up calmly and that will help solve the problem, that's really quite invalidating for parents of a highly sensitive child. Your child needs to buy into the strategies and support, and you need to be the one to help them do that. So that process is going to take some time, and can happen a heck of a lot faster if you've got a system, obviously. So, but in terms of consistency, so much so that to the point where you forget that you used to have this major problem, this is what we're talking about. That's why I wanted to put this one up here today. So, regarding the challenges, what I think is important, in the last couple of videos that I've made and sharing wins of our clients is really in helping you understand what's possible, because especially right now, so there's so much news around like what sucks out there and what's awful, and some really sad and awful things are happening. Certainly that's the truth. And it's also true that not everything is crappy. You can still experience positivity in your own household, in your own bubble, while noticing that the world can feel too big to handle right now in your own conceptualization. Because honestly, at the end of the day, you come home to your family, or you stay home with your family, depending on your work situation. And that's not going to change. That's not going to change regardless of what the environment is looking like, and how long that's going to play out for you. So, for your community, for our community, here in the United States, different countries are dealing with it differently, and are in different levels of lockdown, or not in lockdown. Just the country might be in lockdown, to outside visitors, etc. But I'm going to speak primarily to the U.S. for now. And the bottom line is that when you're in your own home and you don't know how to help your child, and when you're isolated to the point where it's winter and people there are, for a lot of the country, it is harder to go do stuff. The northern half of the country, I should say, it's harder to go do stuff. That process of your child struggling to use skills and to do that consistently, it can be in your face a lot of the time, even all of the time, it can feel like. And without an ability to help your child move out of that in a systematic way, it can feel really discouraging, but it also can breed resentment. And so I want to invite you to have a conversation with myself or my team around whether or not you can, and how you can break out of this pattern, whether or not we can help you do that, is something that we would determine on a phone call, because there are some circumstances where we just wouldn't be a good fit. But the other piece of this is, if we're not a good fit, we would give you a different solution. We would help you find another solution for your family, and that would be more appropriate. So regarding that conversation, we'll take a look at where you're struggling, whether or not, and what skills, strategies, supports, and systems you put in place to try to break out of this on your own. And then we'll talk about what your goals are and whether or not we can help you achieve those, given our skill set, that of the team that I have, and then also in terms of how the program's designed and how we support families in that respect. So then we would, share with you what that works and what that looks like. But if, again, like I said, if it's not relevant, then we would simply tell you exactly what would be more relevant for your family. And so you would go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk, and you would book that conversation. And if you're in a 2-parent household, you'd bring both parents to that call, because you would want to make sure that we got a clear picture of what's really going on in the family. And in 2-parent households, you have 2 different brains, 2 different perspectives, 2 different experiences. So we request that both parents get on the phone with us for the first conversation, just to be respectful of everybody's time. So that's that. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.